Hey everyone, welcome back to the Standout Podcast. I'm here again with Landon and Adam, and today we're kind of continuing our, I guess you could call it a mini series of four things. The last episode we talked about money, and this episode we are going to be talking about fame, how to handle it, what to avoid, all that kind of stuff. Um, so yeah, let's get into that. Adam, would you like to start us off?
So, one thing that we need to keep in mind is that, like money, fame is not inherently bad. It is not a sin to be famous or popular people. However, also like money, fame can be handled improperly, and in which case it does become a sin. Unlike money, you can completely avoid fame. You can live a good life on this earth without being famous. I know plenty of people who do that. Good people and bad people who are perfectly content in their lives without being famous. And they don't need to be famous to live. It's not like money in that we just need it to get by in this world. It's an extra, I guess. We don't need to be famous. But should we become famous, we do need to know how to handle that properly, because being famous, you're well on your way to struggling with pride. You can be a famous pastor, part of a famous band, or a great podcast, whatever. You could be a celebrity. Uh, Being famous automat basically automatically means you're going to be tempted with pride. So that's kind of where we want to focus this discussion today.
Could you kind of expand on what you said when you said that it would inherently give us pride?
Being in the spotlight, being famous, and well known by a lot of people, it's just the human nature to get kind of puffed up with that, to start thinking more about ourselves as more people talk about us or compliment us. And every day we, like, when we're complimented or someone is saying something nice about us, it may not be that big of a deal in regards to being tempted with pride, because it's just the random person who compliments you, and it's not consistent. It's not something you just kind of expect from people. But if you're famous, then it's kind of expected that people talk about you, or you're complimented, or uh, I guess valued in people's eyes. So being famous, I guess you kind of just learn to expect the compliments, the popularity. Now, this isn't the case for everybody, but if you're complimented and congratulated on a daily basis, it's something of a routine. You kind of just expect it. And the more people talk about you, the more you're likely going to think about yourself or talk about yourself, do things from a more self centered perspective. Whereas a normal person can receive a compliment, and it's exactly that. It's just a compliment. It's not a part of a routine. So I guess what I'm saying is it can fame can lead to pride if you're just so used to people talking about you and complimenting you for what you've done.
So, biblically speaking, why is pride bad?
Well, biblically speaking, pride is essentially the root of all sin. By sinning, we are, no matter what we're doing, we are essentially saying that we know better than God what the rules are. So we're taking matters into our own hands and doing things our way. And no matter what sin that is, be it theft, murder, whatever, it's rooted in pride, in thinking that we can do it better our way instead of God's way.
All right, thank you for clarifying on that.
So that kind of leads me into a passage in First John, chapter 2, verses 15 and 16. which says, "Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh, and the desires of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not from the Father, but is from the world." So, desires of the flesh, desires of the eyes, pride of life, it's talking about pride. All sin from any person can be categorized under one of these three: desires of the flesh, the eyes, and the pride of life. And it just boils down to pride. So if we're acting on our pride, desires of the flesh, desires of the eyes, the pride of life, we're not acting on God's will. We're acting on our own, taking matters into our own hands, doing it our way. So that is a danger of being famous. You're just, I guess it's some stepping stones to being prideful. And as this passage says, it's not from God, but it's from the world or the sinful desires that are within all people.
Pride is definitely something that we should try to avoid if we're famous. It's definitely a problem with being famous. But would you say it is the biggest issue, I guess, with fame?
Yes, I would say that being prideful is one of the biggest issues with fame. And that's not just for non-Christians who are famous. That can even be for famous Christians. Satan knows where we can stumble. And if we're famous, then that's a really big stumbling block he can put in our path. And he doesn't actually have to do a whole lot, just cause us to question God and question if what he's done is actually good, and that we'd be better off serving our own interests rather than God. So Satan doesn't tempt you if you're not likely to struggle with that. The opposite is true. If you're struggling with something, then Satan will tempt you with that. An example that my parents used is a recovering alcoholic. Now, an alcoholic is definitely struggling with getting drunk, and Satan knows he can trip that person up by tempting them with alcohol. Kind of an extreme example considering that we're teenagers, but the principle stands. Or if you're struggling with something, Satan is going to tempt you with that. And if you're famous, then I guess selfishness and pride are going to become temptations for you.
Okay. So you said pride was one of the biggest problems that fame has, I guess. So what would you say are some other pretty big problems that are involved with that?
Could you rephrase that question for the purpose of our audience, please?
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about pride and what it has to do with fame and how we should try to avoid that. But that's probably not the only problem that is involved with fame, I guess. So do you think there are any other major problems? I mean, obviously, pride is a big one, but do you think there are any other uh, big problems that need to be addressed with fame besides pride?
Yes, I think, well, deception about who you actually are is a big one. Now, I'm not speaking from experience, bear in mind, but I would think that if you're famous, then it's easy to magnify what the good about you and kind of diminish your flaws and your sins, is to make you out to be a better person than you are. Another one would be, I guess, dishonesty, which kind of goes with that deception, but just not admitting you're sinful, just not admitting that you're still a fallen human being. I mean, it kind of just all connects back to pride, just elevating yourself and not giving glory to God.
Yeah, those are some Some good points. So basically, the first one you mentioned probably has to do with like identity, I guess, trying to figure out who you are and what everyone else says you are, all that. And then the second one, kind of dishonesty and then deception because you want to look good for everybody else. You want to keep that perfect image to make yourself look good, which, yeah, it does in the end kind of all go back to pride, but those are some other issues that come out of that.
Before we get too far, we gotta talk about the different types of fame, so to say. I can name three off the top of my head. You know, one being like celebrity fame, which is where you're in like a movie or you blew up for something and now a lot of people know your name. Then there's scandalous fame, which is something like a lawsuit, maybe, or could be like an affair or something where people know you for a, generally speaking, negative connotation. And then finally, there's what arguably is the best type of fame for Christians, and that is fame out of respect. That'd be something like a community leader, somebody who's taking charge in your local church, who's really doing good work and they're making sure things get done, and they're well respected, and that for that reason they're famous in their community.
Yeah, those are some good points. For that last one, fame, more like respect. That one is probably the biggest stumbling block for Christians. So the fame out of respect, as you said, Landon, in church or community, what comes to mind is pastors with that. That being a really good speaker or a really charismatic individual. And I've been to 2 or 3 churches where they've had very charismatic and eloquent pastors who were well liked and respected by the congregation. It's important to know that they're not better people than us in the sense that they're less flawed or the things they do are better than everyone else. They're still people. We had a while back, I witnessed some sin in a pastor, and the the whole incident just really shook that church, and it was traumatic for some people because they held that pastor in such a good light. They forgot that he was still human, that he was still sinning, that he needed Jesus just as much as they did. So that's one issue that I see with fame out of respect, is that not so much for the person who's being held in respect, but rather the people who are respecting him, is that they forget he's still a person, that he's still a sinner just like them.
Yeah, for sure. It's important to make sure that we don't put pastors on a pedestal because at the end of the day, they are just human, just like us. So one other thing that I wouldn't call it its own separate type of fame, as we just mentioned with those three ones: scandalous, respect, and celebratorial. But I would say that popularity is another issue that many of our audience could relate to a little bit more than just fame in general. And what we mean by this is people, when you're famous, okay, we'll use that word. When you're famous, people know you, but they don't really know you, and you don't know them. When you're popular, it's more so because people know you, like they know you, and you somewhat know them, or you do know them, because it's a more personal connection. But we would think of a difference as a actress versus the cool girl at school, right? There's a difference in how they are known, right?
Yeah, I'd say personally, it would be for popularity. Somebody you know who's popular, you probably know them personally. Like you talk to them, you're friends with them. Whereas it was as if it was like a celebrity, an actor, somebody like that. You know of them and you kind of know them, but you've never actually met them. You don't hang out with them all the time. You just know of them. it's a pretty big difference there. But yeah.
So, Adam, you were talking about this the other day, and we were talking about what was that monetization of like Christian organizations or Christian groups. Could we talk about how that can relate to fame itself in some different areas? I know you have some ideas on this.
Again, it kind of just goes back to pride and the dangers that come with being famous. Uh, Christian artists and podcasts that are even mildly successful, it can be a struggle to maintain the humility and integrity of a Christian once you're getting paid for what you do. Now, money can cause people to do a lot of things, or I should say, the desire for money can cause people to do things you wouldn't think of them. Now, that may not be going to be extreme and killing people over money, but dishonesty in funds and how you pay people can come as a result of pride. Making money for what you do, uh, which was originally intended to glorify God. Any good thing can be corrupted. We can turn something from a humble service to God into a huge source of income for us where we don't even think about giving glory to God. Now, I have here in my notes, monetizing a ministry can come with all sorts of issues about why they're doing it. Now, if our own pride is getting in the way, it can be hard to remember that we're supposed to do all things for the glory of God, whether it's singing on stage, running a podcast, or just even quietly serving in your church. We have to do it all for the glory of God. If we're struggling with our pride, it's hard to remember that. It's hard to remember that we're supposed to put God first in everything that we do. Like money, if we're not putting God first, then our efforts are not being blessed by God. So any success that we're having, it's from ourselves and not from God. We're doing it
Yeah.
apart from God's will.
So what? Okay. So what are kind of like what's the why? Let me put it this way: what are the consequences of doing something for your own personal gain, such as we'll just say trying to become famous, to stick with the topic? What are kind of the consequences for doing something like that?
One of the consequences of doing things just so you can become famous, I would say, is eventual downfall. You're elevating yourself, climbing up your own Tower of Babel, and you may get pretty high. You may get pretty famous, but in the end, you're going to fall hard. Or the higher you climb, the higher you elevate yourself, the higher your fall will be. As Proverbs 16:18 says, pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. If we're elevating ourselves, then we're sinning by our pride. It's a direct manifestation of the pride that we have in ourselves. If we're thinking highly of ourselves, doing things for the sake of becoming famous, we are showing our pride in ourselves to everyone who is watching. Like I said, we're climbing our own Tower of Babel, and we won't stay up there forever. If you're working to become famous, that's going to come back to bite you one day, because you will fall. Now, that may not come instantly or immediately after becoming famous. You might have time to get comfortable up at the top of that tower, but you're going to fall. And it will be a hard fall that you'll probably never recover from. So that's one danger of working to become famous.
Okay, great. Thanks for clarifying on that topic right there. So Can you explain why, to an extent, we do actually need fame in order for the gospel to be successful?
Like I said at the start of this episode, fame in itself is not inherently bad. Our motives for gaining fame can be bad. However, they can also be good. Well, I shouldn't say our motives for gaining fame can be good. We can be famous for the good works that we're doing, and that is not sinful in itself. If you're famous, I'm going to use the example of a famous pastor. If you're famous, then you can reach a broad audience. People at church are excited for you. They love hearing you preach, and they share it with their friends, possibly their non-believing friends, and the fame that this pastor holds can lead others to Christ just because of the platform he has to reach people. I'm going to use Billy Graham for example. I know this is kind of what everybody does, uh, but I'm going to use Billy Graham anyway. Um, he had a huge platform because he was very famous, worldwide famous. He was able to reach tons of people and preach the gospel to them. Now, his platform was noticeably larger than that of the pastor at your local church, uh, who may or may not have an online service for that church. However, the difference in their platforms should not be underestimated, I should say, because that local pastor is just as capable of uh, preaching the gospel to people as Billy Graham was. So the fame that we have can be a good platform for preaching the gospel. However, it's not a necessity for us. We don't have to be famous to go out into the world and make disciples of people. The
And
platform is larger if you're famous, though.
yeah, it makes it a lot easier to spread the gospel through your actions if you have a larger platform. But hey, there is one other thing that needs to be noticed. There's also the inverse, which would be a Christian who is famous but happens to be more so on the infamous side, or scandalous, shall we say? And they're showing what Christians should not be like. People you could bring to your mind when you're thinking of this are like Carl Lentz, the pastor of Hillsong, New York, who was exposed for multiple scandals and money problems and affairs over the course of a couple years here. And he was not using his platform correctly. He was using it for sin and evil and was not using it to further God's work. And so he took a big downfall and is almost universally disliked now by most Christians.
Yeah, that's a good point. Sins that pastors or famous Christians commit, the media and non-believers love to focus on that because even by non-believers, pastors are held at a higher standard than other Christians. So when they mess up, everyone just loves it. They just can't get enough of that because the so-called Christ follower sinned, and oh, well, he must not be preaching the right truth because he's sinned. We have to be very careful if we're famous to live in accordance with God's word, not sinning, not getting involved in any scandal or immature behavior. Because, like I said, non-believers love that stuff. They love exposing Christians for sin.
Yeah, we definitely need to be watching out for that. So we've talked about quite a few things here now, and it's at the point where you're probably starting to forget stuff if you're watching this, and you don't quite know what some of the first points were. So we're going to go ahead and summarize some of those for you. Adam, what was your first opening point for today? We said first thing, Christians should not be aiming for the spotlight, and what that means is you shouldn't be actively trying to be famous for personal gain. That's not to be confused with trying to spread the gospel on a larger platform. It means personal gain, not the gain of the gospel. And well, if you do get the spotlight, just make sure that you're not doing anything out of sinful or prideful nature. Pride leads to sin. Pride is sin, and it's going to lead you down a long path that you will not be able to get out of so easily. You also want to make sure that you are doing everything for God's glory. I think, oh shoot, what was that verse? Whether you eat or drink or whatever you do all for the glory of God. We'll flash that one up on the screen here, the reference, so that you guys can note that. And yeah, you really got to make sure that what you're doing is within line with God's plan. You don't want to be rushing it. You don't want to be slowing it. You want to be perfectly in sync with that. And if you do, everything's going to work out just fine. I know Adam and Summer can testify to that. The multiple different types of fame that we covered, which are celebrity fame, which is like an actor, scandalous fame, which is like a scandal, think Nixon and Watergate, and then fame out of respect, which is kind of like your local guy who everybody respects, and he's famous in your community because he's well respected and he does the right thing. Furthermore, you do need a platform to an extent, but that's not to be confused with a giant platform. 5 people is a platform. You got 5 people to listen to you spread the gospel. Just do it. Even one person's a win. If you can just, plant the seed in them, that's great already. You're doing the great work. That doesn't mean you need to have 20,000 followers, 200,000 followers, 1 million followers to spread the gospel. It just means you got to start working in your local community and your friends and family. Adam, anything I've missed?
Well, just that one point, money, relating it to money, in our last episode, how fame is not inherently bad. Like money, we can use the fame that we have for good or for evil.
Yes, very good point there. You can use anything you have for good or evil. It's up to you to make the choice and to do the right thing at the end of the day. God gave us free will for a reason, and you better use it. So if you have not already watched our last money episode, go ahead and go watch that so that you can tie it into some of the points on this one. If you watch all of these episodes once they are out, it's going to make a lot more sense than if you're just watching them one-on-one. Summer, you got any parting words for us on fame?
Just that, kind of like you said when you summarized all the points, you don't have to be famous to share the gospel. Sure, it might help and it might be God's plan for some people, but it might not be for you. You literally, like Landon said, you can have one friend, you can have 5 friends, you can just have your family, and that's still a pretty good sized platform to share the gospel with. And you'll have, I'm not going to say you won't have any problems with that, but you probably won't have the same kind of problems as you would if you were trying to share the gospel through fame.
I would like to go and kind of piggyback off of that for a minute. Being famous can give you a large platform to spread the gospel. However, it may not be as effective as just the few people that you can reach. Sometimes that one-on-one discussion with a mentor can mean more than listening to a sermon in a room with 100,000 other people. That one mentor might be what would cause you to become a Christian, whereas listening to the sermon in the giant room, it would just be an event that you'd go to. You wouldn't pay much attention to that. Now, the platform of one, it can lead a person to Christ. However, it can also help the person who is spreading the gospel to disciple that one person. If you come to Christ at a huge event with a famous pastor, that one pastor may not come alongside you and disciple you and help you grow in your knowledge of Christ. However, the mentor in the other case, the platform of one, that mentor will be helping you become a better Christian. So, it just goes back to the saying, bigger is not necessarily better. You may have a huge platform, but chances are you're not going to be able to come alongside all the people who come to the gospel or who come to Christ because you preach the gospel to them in that huge event. But if you're just having that one-on-one conversation with a friend, you can answer their questions, you can help them see more clearly, then you can come alongside them and help them mature in their faith.
Right on, because at the end of the day, Christianity is about relationships, isn't it?
Exactly. Those
Indeed.
are very good points.
One thing I glossed over, and I apologize for that, is there's a difference between fame and popularity. Both can be used to your advantage. Just don't forget the differences, and if you need to relate to it, think of the middle school girl again. Y'all, this was a great episode, and I cannot wait for the comments on this episode. I know they're going to be great. If you're down there leaving a comment for us, go ahead and press like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel for the YouTube algorithm. Helps us spread the good word across the internet, and it's going to keep us going. Y'all, thank you so much for joining us. Adam, Summer, you got any parting words?
This was a fun episode. I can't wait to keep doing more.
Yep.
Y'all have a great rest of your day, and we will see you guys next time. Thank you so much for watching.
Adios.
Bye.